Thank you everyone for joining our call with Cosmin Costinas and Sebastian Cichocki, where we're going to discuss this wonderful traveling exhibition that's been to so many places called A Beast, a God, and a Lion. I'm really happy that an exhibition born at Dhaka Art Summit is alive in real life in Thailand, and it really speaks to the show's success in linking the context of South and Southeast Asia, which was the initial wish I shared with Cosmin when he first began his collaboration with the Samdani Art Foundation in 2016. I want to begin this with a thank you to the Samdanis, to Eric Booth and Jab in Thailand, and the team at MAIIAM for making this new iteration possible, Ivan Pan and Natalie Johnson and their teams in Myanmar, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw's team, especially Shumon, Sebastian, and Joanna, the Sharjah Art Foundation, especially Judith Greer, Art Jamil, the Curator Museum of Art for lending us a wonderful Mrinalini Mukherjee work, which was quite difficult, and the countless people with trust and patience. We had so many people, including artists, hand-carrying works across the region. Cosmin once shared this beautiful idea that we should make a map of all the different people and friendships that made the works coming together possible. And I especially want to thank the Dhaka Art Summit team and the Parasite team, especially Ruxmini, Sajad, and Fanny. And of course, Cosmin, you are one of the most adventurous, curious, and committed curators I know, and a peer who's really a role model for me. Thank you to all the artists, galleries, and lenders supporting them, and everyone who was involved in this show. There's so many people involved in this show, and it would probably take the whole time of the call to thank everyone. To introduce Cosmin. Cosmin is the executive director of Parasite in Hong Kong since 2011. During his tenure, the institution underwent a major expansion and relocation to its current venue in the Wingwa Industrial Building. Beyond running Parasite, Cosmin was also the guest curator of the Dakar Biennale in Senegal, a curator of the Dhaka Art Summit, and a co-curator of the 10th Shanghai Biennale in 2014. He's currently the artistic director of the next Kathmandu Triennale, which is due to open in 2021 and is one of the exhibitions I'm most hoping to travel to. And so a little bit of background about the show from a Dhaka Art Summit perspective. I knew that Cosmin was someone that I wanted to work with during the 2016 summit. So we invited him to serve on a jury for the Samdani Art Award in 2016. And he brought a lot of energy to Bangladesh, and we began the journey for this exhibition, which debuted at Dhaka Art Summit 2018 there. At that time, I was commuting between Manila and Dhaka. The Rohingya crisis was blowing up, and I was seeing these silos like between these regional blockages. So even in the art world, I mean, politically, also with migration, but in the art world, Delhi was really this center for South Asian art discourse, even though Pakistanis can't travel there. And Singapore was really the center or trying to be the center of a Southeast Asia discourse. And there was very little crossover between these two contexts. And this has really changed, or it's beginning to change. And the way that I see that now is not as I did in 2016. And Cosmin really took this to another level. There's many common denominators of the show, which we'll talk about, but this show also looks at, the history of Austronesian migrations, and, it linguistically links Taiwan to Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Pacific Islands, New Zealand, Hawaii, and Madagascar. And the region, I read somewhere in a review, spans 15 time zones. I also have to thank Sebastian, who's also on this call, who came in as a partner before the exhibition was even realized. So together with Parasite, the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, and the Samdani Art Foundation, we were able to realize something much bigger than we were able to do by ourselves. And so I think that's enough of an introduction from me. Cosmin, I would love to hear more about you, about this show.
Thank you, Diana. And you gave the most gracious introduction and acknowledgement as always. So I wouldn't be able to replicate that, but I would nevertheless like to second you in really thanking everyone involved, because indeed this adventurous and ambitious and highly improbable exhibition that nevertheless became a reality even beyond our wildest expectations at the beginning, could have only happened with the extreme generous effort of so many people involved, of all the institutions, of all the artists, of countless friends and networks that you mentioned, who were able to put this together in circumstances in vastly different circumstances of institutionality, of exchanges, of exhibition practices, of cultures of relating to publics. And I think it's really an amazing achievement of an era that it might very well be gone by now, that we managed to put together something that was otherwise only happening among institutions of power, among museums of hegemony, because ultimately this kind of like traveling exhibitions happen among, you know, very wealthy Western and you know, primarily you know, Western European and North American museums who engage in these diplomatic and ambassadorial efforts. And we managed to do this with very different institutions, with vastly lower budgets, but also with a very different ethos and politics behind, because this was not about representation, and it was not about you know, reconfirming status of power, but it was about trying to see how alternative networks and a different idea of hierarchy and geography, or a geography without the same hierarchical coordinates, can be described through this very particular medium of an exhibition. So really big thank you to all of you, and I can't name everyone, but to Diana and to the Samdanis, because they were really like, you know, the initiators without whom this wouldn't have come to life. And to Sebastian, because he's present, and also because, you know, he was, well, also decisive in making it happen from the beginning, but was also particularly behind the version in Warsaw, which was a real summum of the exhibition, and I think also provided a lot of critical opportunities for me as a curator, and I think for everyone involved in the show, to think about important issues raised by the exhibition. As a museum, as a museum in Europe, in Eastern Europe, but nevertheless in a European country, and the first of the two European locations where the exhibition took place, it made us think of, indeed, how these networks of exchanges function among different spaces with different status in a history of colonization. And sort of like looking backwards from that experience of Warsaw, it was important to realize that the exhibition was an exhibition that was commissioned in Asia initially. And it was about a dialogue taking place between artists and, first of all, artists and institutions in different Asian contexts that were trying to negotiate their own sort of like position alongside these coordinates. And indeed, Diana's initial invitation was to look at, but this is also like, I think, a proposition that the summit has been pursuing in different other projects, but it was very much about trying to look at Bangladesh and you know, the Bengal region with a different perspective. So rather than marginalized part of a South Asian region, to think of Bangladesh as the very center of another region, which could very well be, you know, a South Asia plus Southeast Asia, and that place of confluence, but that would also like then pose other problems, I think, because, you know, regions and the way in which regions have been negotiated in various discourses, but in particular for our interest in the field of contemporary art, they've relied, of course, on a great deal of conventions and on a great deal of reductory parameters. So one of the starting points thus of this exercise of looking essentially at Bangladesh from a new angle and a new understanding of the region or its region behind it, we came up with this idea of completely blowing up the definitions of regions by bringing in another hypothesis that was based on, you know, as much as many real, you know, factors as any other region, but completely otherwise plausible. I mean, but as plausible as essentially any other region that could be imagined around Bangladesh. And this was the Austronesian region and the expanse of settlement of speakers and descendants of Austronesian languages, which indeed, as Diana mentioned, originated in Taiwan probably something around like 3 millennia ago, and spread as far as Madagascar in the west, and as far as Hawaii, Rapa Nui, Eastern Islands, and Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the expanses of the Pacific, and encompasses you know, all the languages of the Philippines and most of the languages of Indonesia, and has had significant connections with and a significant presence in mainland Southeast Asia, and can also be found in a continuum of cultural exchanges with the indigenous communities in southeastern Bangladesh, which are culturally and linguistically unrelated, but are part of a continuum of cultural exchanges in the mountainous part of mainland Southeast Asia. But there was another reason why this region that embraces, if you look on a map, embraces Bangladesh and Bengal, but doesn't actually include it. But the most important reason why we brought it in the discussion was because this was actually the most vast cultural spread of a human community outside of Western colonialism, and as such can provide a different perspective on human mobility and on human migration and on human navigation, and ultimately on representation of geographical coordinates. It is also a cultural and technological. It's also important to bring that aspect, because that a major effort of migration and settlement involved an incredible technological development of positioning oneself, of reading geographical coordinates, and of actually building ships. So this realm has actually been also at the basis of a historical development in a series of historical exchanges between South Asia and Southeast Asia, where indeed Bengal was at the very core of it. So Bengal for the past 2,000 years has indeed been at the crossroads of this geography. So rather than a space at the margins, a space at the edge of conflicting India and Pakistan, Bengal was actually at the center of cultural spread, as well as at the center of economic development. And this was another important starting point in our thinking of Bengal's position in that history, and thinking about the economics behind it. And Bengal was, as most of us should know, was actually one of the wealthiest regions of world history for most of the past 2,000 years. And that was a wealth that was based on trade, but it was also based on different industries, and then primarily a textile industry. And this is how textiles were brought into the conversation and became an important part of the show, because they spoke to several interests that we had in telling this story. And one was about the very particular overlap and encounter between different histories that happened in the context of Bengali textiles. Among the many textiles that Bengal was at the center of, there was, of course, the muslin cotton, which was one of the most prestigious merchandises that were traded in both directions, so towards Southeast Asia, but also towards South Asia and Persia and Europe. It's a textile that in most European academic bourgeois paintings of the late 18th century and the first half of the 19th century, most women would have somewhere in their attire at least a fragment, if not a full blouse made out of muslin that was brought from Bengal. And this economy of producing and exporting muslin was actually one of the was essentially destroyed by the British presence in South Asia. It was a systematic and well-coordinating effort to destroy the production of muslin and to replace it with textiles manufactured in Britain. And the destruction was so complete and was so absolute and so telling, you know, for that level of both economic and cultural destruction and, you know, natural destruction, because the plant, the subspecies of cotton that muslin is made out of was in fact completely eradicated, and it's actually lost. So it's muslin is no more. It's not possible to make it anymore. So you know, everyone familiar with textiles current textiles in Bengal, in particular in Bangladesh, knows of the Jamdanis, which are essentially imitations of muslin with regular cotton. And there's efforts to make that cotton as fine as possible, but it is not made from that original muslin subspecies. So textiles were the very embodiment of destruction, of devastation, which was an important starting point. But we were also interested in them because they also hold a particular position in telling a story and bearing traces of exchanges of economic and cultural exchanges that happen alongside this geography of which Bengal is at the center. Because at least for the past millennium, the trade from the different parts of South Asia towards Southeast Asia were at the core of political development, were at the core in both regions, were at the core of religious and cultural developments. But they're also largely visible and reflected in the textile cultures of these regions. And of course, textiles have a very particular ability in keeping these traces longer and transforming moments of contingency into traditions that are impermanent, but they have a lifespan longer than the historical occurrences, the tragedies, or the moments of abundance that brought them to life. So they have this ability to tell us stories that might be lost in any other material world, and they're not fixed, and they're not immutable and unchangeable, but one needs to find ways to read these changes as well, and the way in which like time finds its position in alongside the threads. And now, as I mentioned earlier, there's another object that circulated along these geographies, the object of religion. And one thing that binds together and has bound together these regions was the continuous circulation of religious ideas. And of both of religions and of like different forms of well, basically like religions also as changing bodies and as changing organisms. So from, you know, the spread of Buddhism, of Theravada Buddhism, to the spread, which obviously happened for several millennia, to the spread of politicized Buddhism and fascist inspired Buddhism from the 1930s in Sri Lanka, where, you know, in familiarity with Italian fascism, monks developed a particular ideas about Buddhism as a force of anti-colonial struggle, but also of a pure society that needs to eradicate social, cultural, and religious impurities from society. Ideas that you know, have survived in Sri Lanka and have been important voices in the civil war of the 80s, but they're still very much present in the public arena. But they've also circulated and have been an important inspiration for in Myanmar for the development of political ideas and the current moment of extremism and of state-mandated racism. So we were particularly interested in how contemporary moments of religious thinking and of politicized religion circulate in the region. We were particularly interested in also like looking at such ideas, ideologies, or religions that are less discussed and particularly in an international context. So looking also at the Hindutva developments in India, looking also at how extreme forms of evangelism, of Christian evangelism, is present in different indigenous communities along across Southeast Asia and to a certain extent in South Asia as well. So this became another thread, if you want, if I can use that cheesy metaphor of the exhibition. And of course, we couldn't have had, it was impossible not to have at the very center of an exhibition with these premises with all these ideas and with the place where it was happening, the Rohingya crisis, which was unfolding at the time, and it's still very much a crisis, because that small border between Bangladesh and Burma, the border between the two regions that we wanted to bring together, now South Asia and Southeast Asia, was actually the border between these two countries, which at the time was one of the hottest borders in the world, where probably like around 1.5 million people were forced to leave Burma, were forced by genocidal actions by the Burmese army and Burmese government, and were forced to settle in Bangladesh. So that also like brought in, you know, that the discussion about migration, which has had that particular manifestation and that urgency in that border, but is also an universal, quasi-universal reality, and it's a political matter that informs geographies around the world and makes this a relevant topic. And I think going back to where we started and looking at it from the Warsaw perspective, this actually became, all these questions became like an important point that came up in many conversations that I was having with audience member, actually, like in Warsaw, which was, there was very often came up the question of you know, there is this exhibition which is so vast and there's so many stories and there's so many issues, and what is the purpose of it ultimately? You know, is it about learning? You know, are we learning about a new continent? Are we learning something, us as audience members, about, you know, the vast geographies that are brought into discussion here? And there's obviously nothing wrong with learning, and we should learn all the time. And art is certainly a great, you know, instrument of learning things. But if we, you know, go at the very core of learning and really, you know, look at it as a major epistemic exercise, then what we actually wanted to bring in the discussion, and what the audience in Warsaw was invited to learn about were themselves as well, and about the issues that, you know, were of great urgency in a Polish context, as well as in many other contexts. So things like migration, politicized religion, fascism, imaginations of what regions are, and imagining what could be the basis for imagining a national identity, and how all these cultural references are anyhow based on fluid cultural data, on traditions that change and morph and are to be invented and discarded and constantly built on, in the same way in which, you know, forms of textiles emerge and change and mutate through history. So I spoke a bit too much, but I think we should look at some images. And as a continuation to that, the exhibition opened just 2 weeks ago in MAIIAM, the great institution in Chiang Mai in northern Thailand. And I'd like to also extend a big thank you to Kitima and her team for putting this exhibition together in an extremely efficient and beautiful way, and you know, allowing this improbable curatorial exercise of installing remotely from a distance. And it's something that I would have probably not been able to engage in had I not known the show and been so intimate with the works, you know, through the various iterations of the exhibition. But it's certainly both the professionalism and also the curatorial flair of Kitima and her team that, you know, who were in space with the works that brought it to life so beautifully. And also a big thank you to Eric Booth, the founder of the museum, who also had the great generosity and spirit to bring the exhibition at this very difficult moment. And of course, and you see an image of an exhibition, an angle that I like very much because there's this overlap.
Let's share the screen.
Oh, sorry. Oops. Yeah. Are you seeing it nicely?
Yes, we can see.
Beautiful. Yes, you can see.
View full screen like this. Yeah. Now the exhibition always changed when it traveled from one place to another. The changes were contextual. The changes were sometimes very practical. They were a long list of things that we always had to take into account, but we always wanted indeed to make it a relevant exhibition for a local context. And this is another very long discussion. Maybe we can actually, like, you know, touch it upon in our discussion at the end of, like, what does that mean, you know, because sometimes it means certainly to include local conversations, and sometimes it means about a very explicit association and comparison with local issues. But it also means, but that's not the entire story, because the exhibition is about a particular place primarily, and it is about, and it comes with a particular context, and it is about bringing that context to local conversations. It's a little bit what I mentioned earlier, but it's also about making either conversations from other contexts or universal conversations relevant somewhere else. Now, in the case of Thailand, also because there has been, like, quite a period of time between the moment when we started this adventure and where we find ourselves now. So there was time for research and further thinking, but also because Thailand is finding itself in a incredible moment of reimagining what it is as a community and how it should relate to history, to culture, to politics, how it should imagine its sense of community. And this comes after many years of intellectuals and also artists thinking about these issues and producing works that speak about issues of nationalism and issues of religion and in particular Theravada Buddhism and how progressive politics can be imagined in a context where Theravada Buddhism is present, and of course the issues of militarism and monarchy that are at the very center of it. So you see several works that were particularly added in the Thai context. And this is a little curatorial gimmick that we've done with the help of our host, and I think also, like, with a lot of courage from the host, where we installed the work of Jimmy Ong, a work that has been in the exhibition from the beginning, And it's a very beautiful work that was created in the context of of the story of Raffles, the infamous British colonialist in Southeast Asia, who's still celebrated for whatever reason as the founder of Singapore, but in other parts of Southeast Asia, particularly in Java, he's particularly remembered for what he was, and criminal invader, and somebody who devastated the also like the cultural heritage of Java, and like any good colonialist, he also wrote a book trying to better understand the subjects that he was about to oppress, and it's a magnum opum of Javan history and culture. So you have this beheaded figure, and it's quite ambiguous whether this is Raffles or this is actually like the Sultan of Java. And on the backside you have a quote from a Raffles book on the Javan. It's a chapter called The Ethics of the Javan. And he's quoting a Javan proverb which says, well, in a snake, you know where the venom is. The venom is in his fangs. And in a Scorpio, you know where the venom is, and the venom is in his sting. But with a human, you don't know where the venom is. The venom is in his whole body. And then you have this beheaded figure wrapped in batik, and we installed it in the room close to portraits of Thai royalty. Which, like in any institution in Thailand, you know, they're always present. So there is a very direct, if you want, manifestation of responding to local context. Perhaps we can go a little bit through some of the works. And the exhibition was organized around several chapters that were not clearly separated. And maybe I can speak about one or two as an example of how, of what kind of dialogues occurred in the exhibition. And maybe one can extrapolate that to the whole show, which would take a long time to be introduced work by work. So this is one of the first things that was, I think, in most places visible to the visitors, and this is skirt, a female skirt from the Indonesian island of Sumba, from eastern Sumba, and it's made with with a very complex local technique of supplementary weft, and natural and locally occurring indigo dye. And it's the motif that you see is very interesting, because it's traditionally meant to be a representation of ancestor figures, but particularly a representation of the original settlement of Sumba, of the first arrivals to the island. And we were very interested in this story, in the fact that this is ultimately about a mythological representation in the Austronesian world. All the languages in Sumba are Austronesian. It is in the language of textiles, but it's also a very contested document in the contemporary politics of Sumba. And to go very briefly into this, and Indonesia has negotiated as part of its national identity, an unstable compromise of a state of that is worshipping a monotheistic God, which basically allows Islam, allows Christianity, and also allows the form of Hinduism that was particularly reimagined in the 1950s to fit this political definition as a monotheistic religion, which means that all indigenous religions that do not fit in these categories basically have to opt into one of these accepted religions in order to be fully participating in the life of the country. And Sumba was actually one of the most isolated communities in Indonesia. It was also only really colonized by the Dutch in the first decades of the 20th century. So this decision of which of the religions to join happened in the last decades. There's also like a very strong presence of the local religion, Marapu religion, which is actually like quite organized throughout the island. So while still a significant part of the population is Marapu, different other communities have more or less formally joined either several Christian churches or Islam, which means that members of all these communities, based on the religion to which they belong, have a different worldview and a different understanding of their original history. And the explanations that you can find on the island of like, where do we come from? You know, the scene represented in this textile range on a geography that is, you know, as broad as the one that we were including in the exhibition, because there are explanations that range basically from Greece to Turkey to Arab world to India and to China. That shows a little bit of, yeah, I think it's a good example of constructing histories and how religion works in that context. Yeah, so then there's the work of Malala Andrijivia-Alzana from Madagascar, who creates these collages of maps and banknotes and various elements taken from this, well, maps that were all produced in Europe in 19th century, so at the height of colonial expansion, of European colonial expansion and subjugation of the world, and overlays them with fragments taken from banknotes, primarily from newly independent countries around the world. And obviously banknotes are one of the places where a nation represents itself and lays down its vision of itself, its aspirations, its, you know, most noble ideals. So when you extract all these different fragments of hopes and dreams and projections and fantasies, you get these very tumultuous and conflicting ideas of the world and of humanity in a geographically described context. But maps were also very important for us because, and this little chapter that I'm getting into details was very much constructed around the idea of maps and of navigation. This is still Malala. You see the tumult. I'll go back to Malala, but then I want to introduce the work that you see on the right side of the image, which is by Daniel Boyd, who is an Australian artist of Australian Indigenous and Vanuatu origin, who represents in these paintings objects of navigation historically used in the Marshall Islands of Micronesia, so in the Pacific. So they were one of the several instruments of navigation that the Austronesian people used in the vast process of settlement of this 1/3 of the seas of the world, but not just as an initial settlement, also of continuous trade and exchange alongside these sort of vast expanses. And these have been historically described as maps, as navigation maps, or as navigation charts. And they're made, the objects that are represented in these paintings are made from sticks, pebbles, shells, and various other fragments, and they all have these very intricate forms. This technology, the knowledge of this technology disappeared with colonialism. So there is no real knowledge of how these instruments were actually deployed. It's also important to say, to bring another element, that these were not, there was a very strong taboo of bringing them on ships during the navigation. The sailors had to memorize them and leave them on the ground before setting into the voyages, which is very interesting because it also creates a very different relationship with knowledge and with representation, because the sailor had to embody this knowledge and became part of also of the contingency of his they were always male, memory and you know, mnemonic processes. And it's also very interesting because if we go back to the maps that are the background of Malala's works, the grand European maps of the 19th century, it's a very, they occupied a very different position in that act of navigation. You know, you had the European ship, you had the captains that had maps at his disposal, you know, to be possessed, to be controlled, to be, you know, on top of them, to be taken out and rolled and, you know, always available for domination. And maps in that, in the European maps, they have a claim of being representations of reality. And of course, when you map something, you control something, and any act of mapping is an act of possession of some sort. And then going back to this Micronesian objects, it's important to say that they never even had very likely that claim of being images of the world. So the little pebbles are unlikely to be representations of islands in the same way in which the little traces of pencil on a 19th century European map would be claims of real distances between islands. They're more likely aide-memoirs and instruments to access one's own memory, or to access very likely formulas of calculation of wave swells, of wind direction, of particular positions of stars at particular times. But again, they were not images of the position of these stars. They were aide-memoirs of equations of how to read them. So it also brings in a very different relationship of the navigator with knowledge, with the knowledge of the earth and the sea that one is navigating. And I think this sort of like contrast and this conflict here between the realities that these two works talk about were a crucial part of the exhibition. I think many things are explained there. Oh, there's a better image here. We also commissioned Simon Soon, who is a great art historian and occasional artist, to produce one of his first artworks together with R.J. Camacho and Celestine Fadoul, who worked on the wood production in Bataan, in the Philippines, in a great craft center. This objects, these panels, which are all meant to tell the real story of the voyage around the world of a Hawaiian king of the mid-19th century. King prior to the obliteration of Hawaiian state and culture by American imperialism at the end of the 19th century, when Hawaii was a sovereign indigenous nation, and actually like two of its kings engaged in distant voyages for diplomatic purposes, and one such voyage saw the king stopping in different parts of the world, and these panels sorry, and these panels, so each are in one stop, and maybe I should go a little bit faster. But one of them, the second one, shows the King of Hawaii visiting the Meiji Emperor in Japan, and this was actually the first ever a visit of a head of state, of any head of state in Japan, and it was a visit among equals. There's some record of the meeting in which there was a discussion of setting up an alliance between the two nations and two related nations. There weren't that many a genuine historical connection between the two, but you know, it was a good diplomatic starter. But then in the bottom panel, you see the visit of the king to the Sultan of Johor in today's Malaysia. And of course, both the Hawaiians and the Malays are Austronesian people. And this was something that was actually discussed without using this term, but there was a discussion about the Pan-Pacific connection and about the need of establishing confederation of some sort, of an alliance between the peoples of the region to, defend against European intrusions and encroaching European imperialism of the time. And this is, again, a very important point in the context, in the economy of the exhibition, because it brings in a completely different imagination of politics, of geography, of alliances, initiated by a kingdom that doesn't even exist anymore, and as a result of one of the most savage and consequential acts of colonialism, and an imagination of the globe and of its political poles that is completely alien from our current moment, but could be a potential for various struggles and various efforts to actually engage in different contemporary and future relevant thinking of alliances. Very beautiful work by Simrin Gill, which documents the traces of floating discarded pieces of wood on the oceans, and uses them as as printing presses, as prints on ledger paper, on these great documents of colonial organization and control. Or the paintings of Ida Slosin, an artist from Taiwan, from the Atayal nation, in indigenous nation of Taiwan, who set up into this project. She's much more advanced than what we were able to show at the time, to travel to all the edges of the Austronesian world. So you see basically in the triangle painting is from Hawaii, and then the other ones are from the Rapa Nui, the eastern island. And to paint impressions of those places, as an act of connecting her nation, which are, is in the original home of the Austronesian nations, and all these different places where her, cultural cousins traveled to. And this is a particularly interesting work because, this act of traveling and of painting impressions and bringing impressions is also very loaded in the context of colonialism, because this is how, in the same way as Mr. Raffles, felt compelled to write a book on the about the territories that he visited and conquered. Most there was this unholy alliance between colonial oppression and economic exploitation, and then scientific and cultural investigation and research into colonized places. So there is something particularly empowering to have an indigenous woman artist turning upside down this act of traveling and painting impressions, and sort of like sending back impressions of places. And also like the beautiful work of Charles Lim from Singapore, who's, I don't have so much time to get into details, but it's also very important because it studies the technological culture of navigation across the Indo-Pacific area. And this is also something important for Bangladesh, because that's also a technological moment that actually unites Bangladesh to, this broader oceanic parameters. Or Joël, Adriano Merasua, also of Madagascar background, and then his abstract works that nevertheless bring together textile fragments that are very loaded with economic and social history. They're fragments extracted from different markets, both from Madagascar and in this case from Gujarat in India. And of course, Gujarat was this major place of origin of most textile traditions. So if Bengal was, I'm going to offend maybe some of our friends, but if Bengal was like a major powerhouse of textile production, Gujarat was actually the place of origin of many specific techniques and styles, and is a strong competitor to Bengal as a textile powerhouse of the broader South Asian region. And you see there's actually different works. So it's a good example of how in different places, different works were shown. Or Ming Wong's beautiful work, sort of queering and hijacking 1950s musical and film from the from the United States that was based on a wartime story of the exotic, and based on the presence of American troops in the South Pacific, in Vanuatu actually. It weaves a very complex story of attraction and of the seduction of the exotic, which was of course an important part of the whole colonial experience. And Ming Wong, the artist, is also bringing in different layers, including the African-American actress who played the character in the film as one of the first, Juanita Hall, one of the first African-American Hollywood stars, was nevertheless often cast in stereotypical roles, including in this piece. But yes, I think we're just going to go a little bit through the different images.
Also, Cosmin, because Jolie is on the call, maybe could you talk a little bit about Dilara Begum Jolie's work, which you had in the
Yes.
image two slides back?
So in that, another chapter, another important chapter that was, here we go, yes. This image here it's from an angle that doesn't necessarily it sort of like unites different chapters, but there were several works that looked at the issue of violence and the issue of representation of violence and the memories of violence, and looking at the great moments of rupture in the geography that we were talking about. Let me see if I don't think I have a good image from, because the work is particularly important now at MAIIAM, where it's shown alongside the work of several Thai artists who look at well, past massacres from Thai history, look at the military history of Thailand. And of course, these works are these beautiful photographic documents at different degrees of exposure, all taking around one building in Dhaka, which was the site of a massacre during the independence war with Pakistan, where the Pakistani army tortured and killed Bangladesh independence fighters. The image doesn't do justice to the work, because alongside the photographic quality and the haunting effect that is brought by the different level of exposure, the photographs are each individually pierced with nails, with many piercings next to each other, which creates a relief effect of the paper itself. So it's not just about holes on a flat surface, but the surface itself develops a tumefied, it's a swollen skin that reflects the inflammation of the history that is otherwise hidden in this abandoned building, with the ghosts that are haunting it. Yeah, so maybe we can move to the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's what I think. We can go on all day, but maybe to kickstart it. So Sebastian is the Deputy Director and Chief Curator of the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. And we've talked about a specific geography that doesn't include Poland, but Poland was, again, very much here in the beginning. And when we talk about politicized religion, a lot of the themes in Cosmin's show were very pertinent to what was happening in your location. So maybe Seb, if you can talk a bit about how this show translated in Warsaw and how you saw it fitting before it even began.
Yeah, I do remember like the first moment when we discussed the show, like we were stuck in this like horrendous traffic jam in Sylhet and trying to imagine what we might do in the future when we get out of the car, you know. Like, so I remember that I only knew that from you that the show will be somehow related to textile, about ancient migration routes, and it uses some contemporary art examples from the region. So I kind of envisioned the show immediately. Actually, the show is what I imagined back then. You know, when I saw it, it was like, yeah, this is the show. This is what I expected. So I remember, you know, when we got to the farm in Sylhet, this future home of the Samdani Art Foundation, I called my colleagues immediately, you know, the museum colleagues. So we have to save the date, you know, like this is this fantastic show. I have nothing to show you. You know, it's only about like migration, textiles, and you know, art from the region, but we need it. So okay, it wasn't that simple, but it didn't take long to kind of persuade them. And so actually, when I saw the exhibition in Dhaka during this absolutely gorgeous edition of the summit in 2018, you know, I spent long hours with the show, you know, trying to understand all those connections, you know, like, you know, you can hear Cosmin, you know, like lingering for hours trying to, you know, embrace all those, you know, links, you know, it's super dense, you know, those hidden stories, narratives, those sometimes contradictory aesthetics. So, but then all of a sudden, I somehow understood why this exhibition is so appealing to me. And then I think the first thing is the aspect of spirituality, irrationality. You know, this whole cluster of you know, like images and sounds in the exhibition. You know, touching this issue of yeah, of the belief. And I think it's quite, you know, of course it's quite crucial to talk about it, especially now in this context of kind of, you know, crawling global counter revolution, this conservative revolution. And also what Cosmin said about, you know, like those you know, different militant groups, you know, those new organized religious sects. And even here in Poland, you know, we are facing kind of paramilitary Catholic militia called the National Guard, you know, like fighting with the feminists, you know. So this is quite a kind of phenomenon. But when we, you know, we can look for certain narratives, energies beyond the Enlightenment project. That was something, you know, for me, wow, this is how we learn actually to modernize ourselves, you know, as an institution, as practitioners, as curators. And I had this feeling that this show really, you know, it emanated this kind of otherworldly spirit, you know, which was completely against our modernist, rational, you know, disciplined perimeters of our institution. You know, like we had this conversation many times with my colleagues who couldn't get it. You know, like it was so appealing, but it felt somehow alien to our institution. So it would be like the first aspect, this kind of spiritual kind of layer. But the second thing is, which really fascinated me, because this is what I've been struggling with for the last 5-6 years. There are those practices which have like double status. So they're like work of art and a work of craft. They are a political movement and an artistic collective. They are like a food cooperative, but they are also like an artistic initiative. They might be a protest song, you know, especially all those splendid textile pieces which Cosmin collected. And I think this is the most fascinating process, you know, like when art has become something else, or like a part of something else, like some bigger non-artistic systems. And the Beast exhibition, it embraces quite a number of such practices when you think about art labor from Vietnam, and their ongoing engagement with the local communities in central Vietnam. It's fantastic. By the way, we are just about to release a new book, which is kind of reconstruction of one of the kind of conceptual art shows from the 60s, which was all like Western and male and white. And now we are kind of reconstructing it with this new kind of constellation of friends and allies. And art labor is a part of the book. So this kind of art, non-art kind of aspect would be also like super important. And the third thing finally is, I know, like I kind of felt from what Cosmin was saying about like this kind of treating an exhibition as a kind of learning apparatus, that you are a little bit skeptical about this aspect of this whole exhibition operation. But I was actually quite convinced that this is like quite a kind of learning environment, which might enable some educational processes. Like this show has its density, has its wisdom. So it's like it's undeniable. And I have to also like admit, like trying to kind of explain like the kind of reception of the show in Warsaw, like even though it was one of the most popular exhibitions in the history of our museum, of course we cannot beat the numbers in Dhaka, but I heard quite a few times that this show, it's so difficult, so hermetic, for like contemporary art museum standards. I don't know, imagine after all those hardcore conceptual neo-avant-garde exhibitions that somebody is saying that this show is hermetic. So but so we even had this like a seminar dedicated to like 3 months before the opening of the show, so our educators might be introduced to some of the practices, like we were inviting some experts analyzing the context of certain practices. So basically, this show is also like a family kind of thing, like being here with you now. It's this it's a network of friends and collaborators. I can imagine this exhibition is kind of like rolling as a big ball and kind of collecting different people, like so it's bigger and bigger, and producing some kind of offsite project, or like at really like kind of shaping some by kind of exhibitions. But I'm thinking now even about our good friend and companion Nabil Ahmed and his Interpret collective. Nabil is like a brother to me. Like he's like Interpret is partly based in Warsaw now. They have a Polish member. Nabil has had like 3 solo exhibitions so far in Poland.
We did have a Polish artist in the show.
Cool.
So it means that. Which means that
he is the Polish. Yeah. It's like the Interpret is like it's based in like 3 cities, including Warsaw, and like he's very well known here. Like he's very much embedded in this local artistic community. There are interviews with Nabil in Polish language. We just produced a series of posters about ecocide, like explaining the like legal connotations of the term, which are distributed all over the country. Interpret is carrying on a kind of investigation on the local crimes against the natural environment in the Białowieża forest. So this is like a massive thing. And also like the artists from the show, they keep coming back. Like it's Simrin Gil is already producing her second work for our museum. And we are just in the process of acquiring her 2 beautiful paper works. So yeah, so it's I think it's I wouldn't kind of underrate this kind of self-learning apparatus aspect, you know.
Yeah, and I would also say from the Bangladesh perspective, this show really did great things for also elevating possibilities and potential for how indigenous artists are perceived locally, or how like something I love about your curatorial practice, Cosmin, is how you try to separate that barrier between craft and art, right? Like it's something that you do across many of your shows, but it really had a tremendous impact in the way that, you know, some of these marginalized positions are elevated. And I think, you know, what you said, something that's really beautiful also, like as an institutional learning practice, is these multiple layers of collaboration, collaborations between patrons, collaborations between curators, collaborations between artists, and Cosmin, maybe another, and also collaborations across contexts. So one work that we didn't see, surprisingly didn't see an image of, like I think of it as like the beast.
There's many. I feel actually, I mean, there's many, and there was
no,
not.
of course.
Yes.
But the collaboration between Rajuddin Chaudhry and Suyu Sien. So you had an artist who also happens to be Rukmini's father, working with mask making traditions of Bangladesh, and another artist that you were familiar with. The two of them didn't meet, but the work in a way was collaborative. Could you talk a bit about like how you connected these practices?
Yeah, I think that was a good, avant la lettre Zoom era collaboration when
yeah, pre-Zoom era, absolutely.
Pre-Zoom era, yeah.
People who have never like met before and can't don't travel, collaborate from a distance. Well, I guess like Rukmini can actually speak even more because she was even more at the core of it. But it came from so we presented the work of Suyu Shen, Taiwanese artist who had produced this beautiful and haunting film set inside a paper world, and you know in the Chinese culture, the world of the dead and our ancestors and our family and on the other side need to be placated and gifted with goods from our side, which are made out of paper and they're sent on the other world by burning. So there is this incredible culture of paper goods that has developed, and it's particularly strong in South China and in Taiwan and Hong Kong, where you have I mean, traditionally it was you had like the paper money, the hell money that would be burnt and would become currency to the people that you send it on the other world. And now you can have like full houses and cars and sushi platters and so on, all made out of paper. And Suyu Shen created this incredible structure with characters as well. And he imagined a dialogue between them, which was a very existentialist dialogue about life and death. And he, knowing what the exhibition was about and what the intention was, he wanted to, have it really grounded in the local context of Bangladesh. And he wanted to be in a dialogue with an artist and asked him to see how he represents hell in that context. And of course, in Bengal, in Bangladesh, there's a particular history around these paper figurines, and they're used in the Bengali New Year parade celebration. And I think they are also very much statements of cultural particularities of Bengal, which, in a Muslim context, these figurines are still produced and they're still part of a broader cultural identity of Bengal. And there was also like this dialogue between them of like how to display it, and the mask, which is very beautiful and is very haunting, but also has like a backside, which is not, you know, it's the rough backside of a mask, but it was always installed in a way that the work of Xu Yuxian was at the back, so you would see only the back of the mask. It's a great work. I mean, it's you know, the punchline is a bit lost when you tell it and don't see it, because it's really about the experience of seeing them together. It is great. It's the image that was actually used in the announcement of the talk by the foundation. So
yeah. You know, Sebastian, you had some really good points. I mean, now that we're talking, like here we brought up like, you know, remote collaboration before the time of the pandemic, but you were reflecting on some roles about what it means to be international and local. Maybe can you touch on those?
Yeah, this is what I'm like really worried about now, because the beast seems to be like an almost extinct kind of dinosaur, you know, like as a format, you know, something which is feeding on those, you know, like international networks, you know, but also cheap mobility, you know, like residency programs and so on, you know, like so. And, you know, we still cherish the memories of those, you know, crowds at the summit, you know, like something which is unthinkable nowadays. So, and this kind of, you know, drive towards, you know, getting really like small, you know, like, and getting local and supporting your like local art communities first is, of course, quite you know, justified, but at the same time, it might lead to creating those kind of enclaves, those little bubbles, you know, like that we will lose this moment of kind of international kind of comradeship, you know, like, and this that they after the end of globalization as we knew it, you know, like we might face also like the end of kind of internationalism as we kind of fantasize about, you know. So what I'm really like worried always, it's like getting into this trap of kind of ethno-nationalism, which might be disguised as something else, as a, you know, as the politics of care, as really like focusing on your neighborhood and so on and so on. So my question would be, and you know, I'm still kind of, you know, processing it, you know, because I cannot quite imagine, you know, what would be the normality, whatever it is, you know, like in 2021. What would be our like a daily job, a daily work, and what would be the systems of kind of supporting those international, very unusual alliances, you know, like, you know, Dhaka, Hong Kong, Warsaw. This is not like the most obvious triangle, you know, like to kind of facilitate such a wonderful program, you know. So what would be your take on this? Like, what are your expectations? We are still stuck, you know, in our apartments, but there will be a kind of moment of coming back to our kind of daily routine or something, you know, like how do you imagine, you know, like this new kind of network of, you know, this constellation of, you know, institutions and collectives and so on?
Diana, you wanna? Yes.
This is a talk with you, Cosmin.
Also, it was. Also, it was directed to me. I didn't want.
It was directed to people who care. You know, like, it's like maybe it was just like a loud kind of thinking, you know, because this is, you know, just to.
I mean, from our side, we're planning for DAS 2023. And I think that, you know, we built all these relationships in that past crazy world, and how do you continue those and drive them forward? But, you know, Cosmin, I wanted to kind of, you know, we can't have this talk going forever, and I wanted to close with maybe bringing up what you're working on with the Kathmandu Triennial, which is carrying some of the legacy of this project, but maybe that lens of as running an institution in Hong Kong and also
that would be super interesting, because you have to kind of apply this kind of new thinking, new filter, you know, like to your like curatorial kind of procedures and so on. It's already postponed, but how do you want to kind of
no,
deal
but
with this?
I want to answer, Sebastian. So I'll answer also your first question. I'm very much on the same page, and with the thoughts and with the worries as well. And you know, we've and supporting the local community is, and from a concrete and pragmatic way, is obviously crucial in this moment of crisis. And this is something that we've done at Parasite with different programs that we developed, and you know, it's something that we continue to do. But I'm also, as you are, worried about what the ideological implications would be. You know, I mean, we should certainly like support the local community because it's at a crisis, and you know, we're the only ones who can do that. But it should not be interpreted as anything else rather than gesture of solidarity in response to a crisis. And it should not, you know, be dog whistle for some sort of retreat from internationalism. I am totally of the, you know, and we're also discussing with Diana, I don't see any opportunity in this crisis. You know, we're in a humanitarian crisis. We're in the midst of a tragedy. We should resist it. We should, you know, do all we can to restore the values that we had and what we, you know, hold dear when this will be over. Of course, you know, there's that was an sick world in many ways, and we should, you know, continue to fight that sickness. But it is not in this crisis that we will find solutions for the, you know, terrible inequalities and conflicts and oppressions of the old world. So I think these are two different things, and I think we should basically strive towards re-establishing and rekindling that international spirit. And then I am an optimist, and I think that will come at some point next year. And then yes, Kathmandu, which you know, we're working with our colleagues in Kathmandu, and with the team there, and we have postponed it, so we'll open in fall 2021. So now you also understand my optimism, and in the previous answer. Yes, it would be like another very long conversation to talk about our intentions, but it also functions at the tension of making an exhibition that is highly relevant to a local community and to issues that are debated in a Nepali context. And you know, I think, you know, Nepal has had one of the most interesting political and cultural discussions of any place in the world in the last 2 decades, because it's one of the few countries that managed to, with, you know, all the, you know, inherent you know, setbacks, but it's one of the few countries that actually managed to reimagine itself in the last 15 years to transition from a monarchical regime and Hindu nationalist state towards a pluralist republic with indigenous communities acknowledged and constitutive to this new polis. You know, something that our friends in Thailand are certainly only dreaming of at the moment, but you know, we all hope that it will be a lesson to be followed. So there is indeed, you know, it is a source of great lessons for many other contexts. So I think it is ultimately our effort can be understood as both as being part of that conversation and trying to see how we bring that and to the world and bring other conversations from other contexts within that that context.
Excellent. Well, I'm really looking forward to hopefully visiting, and maybe to close, you know, Bangladesh is now something that's so close to all of us, right? Like, or all of the three of us speaking, but none of us are Bangladeshi. So I also really want to thank all of the Bangladeshi artists, the Samdanis, Ruxmini and Sajjad, for helping mediate, for helping us understand Bangladesh, because I understand the world in a different way because of the time I spent there. And it was really nice to hear, or to see how these ideas are bleeding throughout the world through all these various collaborations that we all have individually and collectively. And thank you, Cosmin, for the lecture and for all your imagination and hard work. And thank you for everyone who joined us today.
Thank you. And just to mention, because
so
I think well, there's many people that I didn't thank you, but because, you know, I did thank some of the hosts when we were when that respective context popped into the conversation, but then I didn't get to thank our friends in Trondheim and Steffi and Carl, as well as our friends in Yangon and Natalie Johnston and Ivan. So yeah, big thank you to them. And please try to engage with the program that our colleagues and friends from MAIIAM are preparing, so as the last chance is to have a contemporaneous relationship with the show.
Yep, and hopefully hopefully we can all make it to Thailand.
Absolutely. Or at least to Kathmandu.
Yes, exactly. And done 2023.
Of course, yes. Already in my calendar.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.